Chapter 1. He had been here many times before, but not like this. Not within his everyday humdrum life. The only visiting that he was ever managed previously was during those moments of sleep. Yet here he was, as awake, frustrated, and confused as the biggest insomniac that God had ever placed upon this earth. So why had he found himself this morning walking the pathways that he normally had only ever trodden within those midnight and witching hours? The times of darkness when he was unable to defend his own well-being from the creatures that weaved within the sections of his mind. The very thought that had slowly chewed upon the cortex of his brain for such a long period of time. This was the strangest of places, leafy and overgrown, covering the majority of its land, yet amongst the vines strangulating the odd beautiful flower that had settled its seed within the wrong part of the floral neighbourhood were patches of lush greenery. In one of those luscious parts stood a big, thick old tree. It seemed out of place, as if it had once been one of many identical trees within part of a now forgotten landscape. There was no other tree like it within the surrounding area. This was the place that within his dreams Daniel found himself sitting with his back against the widest part of the trunk, as he tried to hide from the demons that stalked his mind. Daniel had always awoken with a drenching of sweat. His flesh seemed to open its glands, with almost drowning him within his own nightmares. His hair as wet as if he had stood under the shower and then given it a quick rub over with a towel. Each time he awoke, he felt that he had fallen deeper and deeper into the depths of an abyss that would never allow him to climb back up. One day he knew that he would finally hit the bottom, but when he did, his nightmare would not be over. It would just mean that another one had begun. He had fallen into the abyss many times within those dark hours, but although he had never hit the bottom, he was of the understanding that whenever he did hit the end of the fall within those unprotected hours, then that was the moment that heaven and hell would battle it out for his pitiful carcass. Each day, after each dream, he became more and more detached from the reality of life, a life that he decided some previous time ago that he could not go on living. There became a moment when the soul could not take any more torture that it had already been through. When that exact moment arrived, then your soul did not hurt. Instead, it became numb, and all senses went into hibernation. When he was in that dreamlike state, he would always be able to see a thick rope dangling from one of the branches of that big old tree. Twine from the rope was frayed, but the rope had always remained strong. If Daniel looked to his right, he could see a dark figure peering at him through the undergrowth. And as he continued to look around him, Daniel could see all the pathways to the other nightmares that he had been forced to walk, so to ensure that as he worked his way through those final moments, he would look back at these nightmare journeys and realise the reason he needed to end his own mortality. So many pathways, and each one of those pathways was flawed with some form of disease of sadness, the gut-wrenching unhappiness that nipped at the flesh, not enough to cause instant death, but the type that allowed the reflection of what may have been to last a lifetime, as that nipping of the nerves throughout one's body began to stimulate the brain. Once the stimulation had been achieved and the anxiety had become too much to take, that was when the numbness would begin the inevitable shutdown, leading to the body not wanting to go any further, and so calling time on what had been the chapters of life. Daniel had now begun to try and wake himself up, because he had come round to the thought process that he must have been dreaming. He pushed his back up against the tree and brought himself to his feet, the crisp snapping of bark dislodging itself from the fat body of the tree and hitting the ground. The law of dreams indicated that either one of those senses, the feeling of the bark rubbing against his back, or the sound of the crumbling remains hitting the earth, would and should have awoken him. Moving forward, he believed that it was just a few more steps that would take him from the dreaming segment within the brain back to his mortal reality. There was a huge flaw in Daniel's belief, this being that he had not woken up. He had experienced hearing the sound of the bark. He had felt it scratching through his suit jacket and shirt, leaving a mark upon his skin travelling the length of his back. And now he could feel and hear the earth beneath his feet, the autumnal leaves still crisp and the dirt solid and dry as the soles of his shoes pressed against them. Closing his eyes, he tried to take himself again to the point of waking up, but the truth was, there was no waking up to be done. After a few moments, he opened his eyes and knew that he had risen from his bed that morning. He had showered, he'd had breakfast, he'd cleaned his teeth, and he'd got dressed for work. White shirt, darkish tie of deep red, and black trousers. These were the clothes of conformance, the clothes of the entrapment as a man, the clothes that signified that today was like yesterday and the day before that, and so on and so on and so on. Daniel had reached that age where he seemed to be marking time, and although middle-aged, he had the belief that he would never ever get the opportunity to ever draw a pension. He would either be striking up a conversation with the worms or be contained within a pot somewhere out of sight. It had been 7 years now since she had walked out of his life, and from that moment the demons had stalked his mind, and introducing themselves time and time again, without ever really letting Daniel truly know who they were. All they would do was take him back to the moments of happiness, and then remind him that there was no longer happiness. This was the marking of time, and the demons within his head were going to let him think that one way or another. Was this the demonic way of letting him end the moments of pain, which had never ceased? Was this his way out? After all, the tree had become a permanent fixture in the majority of those dreams. All Daniel's dreams were so strange, and he revisited every dream so many times. They never changed whenever he did return to one. Then when he was awake, no matter how many times he would dream about the same scenario, he found himself dissecting it, trying to find out the reason why. What was their message? Turning back towards the tree, he stared at the rope that was dangling, and it looked so mighty good. It was like the first time a man and a woman looked at each other and felt that rush of attraction. Those moments of hope that the two bodies would mould together in pure physical delight and become one for as long as the rawness, tenderness and escalating bodily fluids would control themselves before bubbling into a thrusting of relief. The rope was enticing him, turning his flesh to enter, to push his neck into the tightness of its grasp. It was then that he saw the tag that was attached to the rope, and he fumbled within each pocket of his suit jacket before he finally pulled out his glasses. The tag simply read, "One size fits all," for this was the rope of death that did not discriminate against any person on the brink. "Come, let me kiss and stroke your neck." Suddenly he began to become very conscious that he had not contacted work. But why did he have to? He had no intentions of leaving this location, well, not alive anyway. Or was he about to wake up soon? Perhaps he had taken his medication too late that day before, and perhaps this was the resulting side effect. He had kept on reminding himself to believe he was dreaming. Daniel came face to face with that big fucker of a tree, the tree that could withstand any weight of its many visitors. They were visitors who had never left. Instead, their souls clambered around the roots, not in worship, but in the agony of an unsolicited death. All his victims belonged to those who had not been missed, who allowed themselves to be held by their necks, and then once they had been drained of every drop of life, their bodies had been warmed during their moments of purgatory, and they watched their flesh burning under the heat of the humid sun, causing the acceleration of decomposition. It was the body. If the body was there long enough, then the skin would release the putrid juices, and they would drip onto the dry earth and slowly be absorbed to feed the roots. End of chapter 1.